Okay, hello everyone. My name is Tale, and I'm hired here in Knowit ObjectNet, which is here in Oslo, and it's a part of Knowit Solutions. And today I'm going to talk to you, tell you some of the reasons why I fell in love with Elm. And in my abstract, I wrote something like, I have minimal experience with front-end developing, which is not exactly true. I've been involved in 3 front-end projects, but I never felt like I got the hang of it. And part of that is because I think JavaScript is impossible to understand. And it's the first reason why I love Elm. It is not JavaScript. Because often when I write JavaScript, something doesn't work, and I just look at it, and I have no idea why. And then I try to fix it, and I just like, okay, I do this here and do this there, and then it still doesn't work, and I end something back, and then suddenly my code works, but I don't know why. This is an example of some JavaScript code, which is for me kind of hard to understand. You have like an array with both numbers and strings, and you're supposed to filter it based on if you can divide it by 2 and have a reminder with 1, so if it's an odd number. And first of all, if you just look at this, like, does this even compile? And if it does compile, what does it give you? And just by looking at it, you have no idea. Really, does this compile? And it actually returns the number 1 and the string 5, which is weird. I'm not sure if it actually gives you the empty string as well, and I think that that's kind of the most confusing part. I don't know if it gives you the empty string or not. And I signed up for this app, which was like, okay, you should try to code 5 minutes every day and get better at it. And I'm like, okay, this sounds cool. I want to learn more JavaScript. And then it sends me like questions of the day. And it sent me this. What will this be? 0.2 plus 0.1. And I was like, oh, obvious, it's 0.3. But no, it's not. Why? I mean, this makes no sense, does it? So it breaks me over now to why I like Elm. Elm makes sense. Things has a scope, it has a very well-defined scope, and it actually gives you what you expect. And when I talk about like this small scope, this is like something I could talk about, is the plus operators. If you use a single plus, you do that for addition. It's like 2 plus 5, it's 7. If you want to append things like strings and lists, you would use like a double plus. You can't use this in between each other. You can't use plus plus on numbers. You won't be able to append them. The compiler will then tell you that something is wrong. And also, like talking about the scope, here you can see the Elm list compared to the JavaScript array. It has less functionality, but it has like a very well-defined functionality. And you can also see that you would never get that weird filtering of the array in Elm, because you cannot have, in the last line here, you cannot have both strings and numbers in the list. It has to be like a consistent type. Yeah. And also, here's another example. I like to compare it to JavaScript. You can see that in JavaScript, if you want to do string modification, it can even be a field on a string, it could be a function on a string, it could be a function on the string global. In Elm, everything is a function, and functions in Elm look like this. It's like string length is the function, and then storm is the input. And everything is built up the same way, which makes it like easy to understand, and it gives you what you expect all the time. Yeah. I'm guessing most of the people here who have heard about Elm have heard about the Elm compiler. It's the most fantastic thing about Elm. The Elm compiler gives you really good feedback. So when something wrong happens, you can just look at the compiler and it will tell you, oh, you did something wrong exactly at this line. It's missing something. And an example here is if I try to like do an addition of 2 plus 2, but I do it with strings. And as you can see here, the compiler, it tells me that, hey, your left argument is a string, but I'm expecting it to be a number. So it actually tells me that, oh, you have the wrong type. And also it puts on this little cute hint down on the bottom here. If you wanted to append these two, you should have used the double plus operator. So it gives you very precise feedback. Now, I actually wanted to add 2 plus 2. So I changed the first number and like, okay, this is a string. I changed it to a number. And then it told me, oh, yeah, that's good. But now the right-hand side is a string, and I'm expecting it to be a number. And it also tells you here that I checked the left side first. So I think the left side hand of the operator, it makes sense. But now it's the right-hand side that doesn't match with what I expect. So these are just like a little show of how the compiler would tell you things, but it's very nice. And if you combine this, the reason that like things are very well defined and it's a good scope, and also the compiler gives you very well feedback, I think that Elm is very easy to start with. It's very easy to just do something in Elm, get feedback, and then iterate over that. Yeah. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Elm architecture. Because this is another reason why I like working with Elm. I think the Elm architecture, it's easy to understand, and it's easy to work with. And you can summarize the architecture like this. So we have a model and a view, and you can update your model. And the model is the state of your application. And when you keep the state, you keep it as a record. And here you have an example of records. You start up, and you create a record that's called cat lover. It has a field name and a field cats, which is a number. And down here, it's updating the record. So if I want to if I want to update the record, like saying that, oh, Lee, he suddenly has 3 cats instead of 2, then I create a new record with 3 cats. And then I say, I want to keep the cat lover, but I want to change the field so the cats now is 3. And this creates a whole new record. So records are immutable. So every time you update something, you create a whole new record. And if you want to like compare records to something in JavaScript, it's the JavaScript object. But as you can see, it has a lot less functionality. And one of the reasons for this is that the record is used to keep the state, and that's it. So it doesn't need a lot of fancy functionality. It keeps state data, and you can change data, and that's it. Yeah, back to the architecture. So the model is in the state. The state, you can render it by HTML, very simple, and then you can also update your model through self-defined messages. I'm not going to talk a lot about them because it's going to take some time, and we don't have a lot of time. So, yeah. When I create a new Elm app, I like to create the minimum viable product, like the smallest thing that I can create. I created this recipe app because I wanted to share recipes with my friend. And when I started with that, it was very simple. I just had a model. We had a recipe which had a title and a description. And I started with, okay, 1 title, 1 recipe. I want to show this. And after I was able to show the recipe, then I added on, okay, I want it to be a list of recipes. And then I want to be able to add recipes and delete recipes. But I always start out with the minimum viable product. And then I add on this, and I use the compiler very actively to help me tell me what I'm missing to continue to show what I want to. And because the compiler gives you such nice messages, it's very easy to expand. And it's also very easy to refactor. So because of the same things, if you change the name of a field, it will tell you exactly like, okay, you have this, but I don't have no idea what you're talking about. Say if Lee didn't have cats anymore, he suddenly had dogs. Then the compiler tells you, now you're talking about dogs, but I have something reference to a cat, and I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. Readability, it's something that I also think is Elm has. Now, I know that if you've ever looked at Elm syntax, it can be like very confusing the first time you look at it. It's different. Now, I was fortunate enough that I knew some Erlang before I started coding Elm. So for me, it wasn't a huge change. But I do remember when I started to learn Erlang that syntax, it took me some time to understand exactly how it was built up. But when you get used to the syntax, it is quite readable, and part of that is the signature on functions. Now, this is a function, this is the description box, this is from my recipe app. It has a signature on top. The first line here, it's a signature. It says that this function description box should have an input that's a string, and it's an output like an HTML message. And then beneath that, it comes the function, and it's like the description box, and the input is called the description. And then I just have an return an HTML message with the description as text. This is a very easy example, but these functions can get very long. But signatures are still just one line, and it helps you very fast to see exactly what the name of the function is, what it takes as an input, what it returns. So, yeah. When I started working with Elm last summer, and I started with my project, and I had a lot of fun working with it, but then suddenly it was summer vacation. I had 2-3 months of vacation. I went traveling. I moved to a new city. I started a new job here in Knowit. And then I was suddenly, okay, great, and maybe I should go back to my project again. And it was like I dreaded going back to it because I didn't remember anything I had done. It's been 2-3 months since I've touched it, and that can be hard. It usually is hard. But when I opened my Elm project, it was actually very fun to go back to. It was very readable, it was very easy, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I think this was the moment when I realized that I actually think Elm is a very nice language. Like, I knew the other features already, like the readability, the compiler, all of that. But it's the part when you actually go back to an old project that you haven't been working with for a while, and you actually think, ooh, this is nice, this is fun to work with. That's when I realized, yeah, I like Elm a lot. And if you add that, it's also easy to expand from the minimum viable project. It's easy to refactor, and you have readability. It's very easy to maintain Elm code, which is a nice thing. Yeah. Now, I think all of you kind of understood that JavaScript is not my favorite language, but I have a reason here. One of the good things about Elm is that you can integrate it with JavaScript. So Elm compiles to JavaScript. So you can have it as a part of your code base where everything else is JavaScript, HTML, CSS, which is nice because JavaScript has a much larger ecosystem than Elm does. And if you're going to do something that's very complex and it already exists a library in JavaScript that does everything for you, why should you then write everything again in Elm? It's going to take a lot of time, and it's probably maybe not going to be worth it. So you can, if you want to, write some parts of JavaScript, some parts in Elm, and you can combine them to get the best of both worlds. So even though I'm not the biggest JavaScript fan, I do acknowledge that it's very nice that you can compile it with JavaScript, and that JavaScript has features that you cannot get in Elm, as for now at least. Yeah, so I think all of you guys, if you haven't already tried Elm, I think you shall. And the reasons why is because I think it's kind of easy to start with, it's fun, and it's definitely not JavaScript. So, thank you.